So we're delighted to be here today. As Jade said, my name is Emer Darcy. I am leading the family law reform part of the Court Service Modernisation Programme. I'm a civil servant since 1999 and in the court service since 2004. And I've worked in multiple roles from frontline offices, HR, kind of policy type issues, and now working in reform, which I love. And also in the middle of it, there was a little spell involved with COVID response. So it's all good. Deloitte are our transformation partner, and I will just let Brian introduce himself and then we'll get stuck into the presentation.
Yeah, so Brian O'Connor is my own name. Been working with Deloitte for the last number of years. So work specifically in relation to, I guess, looking at how organizations operate and implementing, large-scale transformation for said organizations, and have now been working with Emer and the court service for the last 12 months, looking at their family law reform program. So delighted to be here today talking to you about service design.
Okay, so I'll just give you a really brief introduction in terms of what we're going to cover today. So what we're going to do is we're just going to very briefly set the scene in terms of the Court Service Modernisation Programme. We will then bring you through the approach that we've been using in relation to the programme. Service design is an absolutely central part to it. The key part of information that you want to hear from us about is user personas. So we'll talk about how we've developed user personas, but we'll bring you through some of the user personas that we have developed so that you can see what they look like and the type of information that's in them. And we'll speak about how we developed them. And one thing I'll say is that I've been involved in user personas in two different ways. This one, I think we got much better outputs and outcomes from the approach that was taken. I just found it to be I think we've got very real personas to work with. So then we'll just bring you through two examples of how we have used those personas to go through user journeys for different parts of the work that the family law program is doing. So hopefully it'll give you a little bit of hope that these things can be done and can be useful. So in terms of the court service modernization program. So there's a court service long-term strategy stretching out to 2030. There's a 10-year modernization program. It says starting now, but actually we're 2 years in at this stage. The first year was very much governance, setting things up, all of that kind of stuff. And the reform team, so we have a civil work stream, criminal work stream, people in org, family law. There's multiple work streams. The family law one started kind of March, April last year. So we're a little over a year in at this stage. And that is where we are looking at the future state of family law in the country, which is a very exciting thing to be able to do because nobody has done it before. Nobody has looked at how we provide family law services and said, what should we do for the future? So family law has been layered over existing court structures. So family law is kind of shoehorned into a criminal structure in terms of buildings and in terms of how, court rules and procedures and things like that. And it is normal for relationships to not work and for families to have difficulties, and they're not criminals for going through that. So there's there's a lot of things there that we need to look at. So there's a lot of changes we need to introduce. So there will be incremental changes coming over the next while. It can't be a big bang because there's so much that needs to happen. So that's kind of the scene setting for it. So in relation to our first step, well, the civil reform stream had this lovely big document with a gazillion recommendations, and they went, okay, we'll go implement the recommendations. Family law was kind of like, yeah, maybe reform family law. So that was our guiding direction. So the first thing that we have to do is to say, okay, where is it we want to get to? So what we are trying to do with the family law reform program is to look at the system and to make sure that the system is focused on best outcomes that empowers the people, the children, and the families that the system is for to choose the best path for their individual circumstances. And part of the rationale for that is that sometimes the best outcomes for people is not court. And sometimes people are coming to court who don't need to be in court, but they don't know what their alternatives are. So we're very much moving away from we're going to look at legislation, we'll implement legislation, and good luck to everybody. We're trying to change the focus. So that was step one. Some of the work that we've done over the last while is we're very much focused really last year on future state. It's all acting up on you, Brian, is it? So we're looking at future states. So we're looking at in the future, how do we want family law to work? What is our blueprint for family law in the courts in this country? We have looked at things like how we're going to provide information to the future, and there's multiple projects underneath that. There's kind of lots of sub projects going on. We looked at what family law buildings should look like in the future. As I mentioned, they're currently being held in kind of criminal buildings, and the average age of some of the court service buildings is about 183 years old. So they are not modern, fit for purpose buildings that are people centric. So there's a lot of stuff to happen there. And our key focus at the moment and into early 2023 is very much focused around how future services for divorce and judicial separation will look, from the application stage to looking for information, applying, engaging with the court process, post-court, and how people might access various services that would be relevant for them. So that's kind of the overarching environment that we're working in. So Brian, I think it's over to you next.
It is. So I guess all the work there that Emer has mentioned that we've done to date, we've adopted a user-centric service design approach to all of that work we've completed. So to the buildings work, to the work we're doing now on the divorce, to the work in relation to provision of information. So what is service design? I guess in a nutshell, service design is design thinking applied to services, which I guess would naturally lead into the next question of, well, what is design thinking? And fundamentally, design thinking, it's a mindset and it's an attitude in terms of how you approach looking at change or how you approach looking at problems. So I guess some of the key aspects of design thinking is, the really important bit is that you're understanding your users that are actually using your services or using your products, whatever it might be, and that you're challenging your assumptions that you might have around those users, so that you're not just, assuming that because you think it's this way, that that's definitely the way it is, and you're proceeding on what could be false assumptions. And the other key aspect of this design thinking is that you're solving the right problem, so that you're not just taking the problem that, from the surface, that you're actually digging into it and really understanding what the problem is. And at some point, you're actually redefining what you think the problem is and kind of going back to first principles around that. So the big aspect of it really is understanding your users and making sure you absolutely fall in love with what the problem is. Sorry, is somebody coming in there? Or
I think it was just a mic on.
So that's the concept of I guess design thinking and in turn service design. Sorry, my screen, of course, has stopped sharing properly the one time I needed to. So let's go back and do it this way. Sorry, 2 seconds. Okay, it's a bit smaller, but it keeps breaking the other way. So I guess this service design approach, how does it differ from, I guess, the conventional project delivery approach? On the left here, we see the conventional approach, where oftentimes, you'll design a new system. Coming out of that, you'll shape what your processes should be based on what the system is, and that will in turn, shape what the interactions are with users, and in turn, it'll shape what the customer experience is, all stemming out from what the system is. A good example of what this might be is maybe where you've new legislative change coming down the tracks, and as a result, you need to implement some quick changes, reactive changes to your systems, which need to happen straight away. So that's the focus, and you get them done. And as such, how an organization might operate and its processes are then in turn getting changed directly from that. How we try to look at things a little bit differently from a user-centered design approach is that you're actually looking at the customer, what the and the user and what their needs are. So understanding what their problem is, what they're trying to get from it, and that you're designing your experience around the customer. And at the very end, you're designing your system as it might be around that. So you're working from the user or the customer into what the service or the product is, as opposed to outwards in the more traditional approach. I guess then, what are some of the key principles to the service design approach? So whilst you're aiming to put the user at the center of absolutely everything you do, it's just making sure that you're keeping the overall vision and the business objectives in sight at all times as well. Key aspect of it is basing your knowledge on evidence. So where there's data or MI available, you're using that and your analysis around that to base any of your decisions or any of your knowledge on that. And it's, again, as I mentioned earlier, then you're not basing it in any assumptions. then it's also that you're considering things end to end and front to back, so that you're not just looking at a small problem, you're looking at it end to end from a user's perspective. So if you're looking at a service, you're looking at it from the very start or before they interact with the service to the very end of it, and then coming out the other side of it. But also from a front to back perspective, because your users aren't just your public users or your customers, they're also your employees. So that's where your front to back comes into as part of any process or anything. You're looking at it end to end from maybe a public user perspective, and front to back from your staff interactions, etc. as well. Um, Another key principle of service design is that seeking to make things simpler. So, eliminating any unnecessary steps in a process or in a service that don't need to be there, or that maybe are being done just because that's the way they've always been done. It's about looking at them and analyzing them and seeking to make things simpler. And finally, ensuring that you've ongoing input and engagement from the users themselves, from the staff that might be involved, or from other stakeholders. So I'm going to move on next to user personas. So we mentioned at the start, a lot of this is going to be about personas, but where we talk about service design there, a key aspect of bringing that kind of user-centered design to the forefront is by using personas. What is a user persona then? So a persona is a fictional character designed to represent a user of a service or a product, and it helps us to understand their needs, their experiences, their behaviors, and their goals. The important thing here is that personas are not real people, but they are meant to capture the characteristics of real people and to help us bring them to life so that we can, understand how somebody might use our services. And then in terms of how we bring them to life, we try to capture details such as, making up names for them, inventing a background in relation to them, and then identifying challenges and goals in relation to them as well. But all of those aspects that we create in relation to them are meant to be representative of the users that we see using our services. Why we use personas then? I guess why we use them basically is to ensure that we are designing meaningful experiences that actually incorporate the needs of the users themselves. So some of the benefits around them is that they help us create a far stronger focus on users and their context throughout the journey. So you create user personas perhaps at the start of the project, and you use them the whole way through, at the very start of when you're doing, high level exploration in terms of what services could be, right down to the detailed design and through to maybe how you might be testing it at the end, taking that lens and that view of who these personas are. They allow us to imagine users' real life scenarios and project them into these new situations that we want to be able to consider and test, basically. And quite importantly, then they help us identify the why behind users' needs. When we go about creating user personas, just to flag, it's very important that we remember that we are not the users. So, like, some of us might actually fall within the target bracket of who we see the persona as being in relation to, but we need to remember that we aren't actually the users themselves, and that we're not basing our personas on assumptions that we typically have in relation to them. For service design projects to work properly, you need to be basing your personas on real research. So that is qualitative and quantitative data in relation to our users. So that might be user research, going out and talking to users themselves, understanding how they use our services, what their pain points are when they're using them, what the challenges are, but also looking at hard data in relation to, maybe it could be sections of society, age demographics, this kind of stuff that might help us create personas that are most representative of our target users. So I'm going to hand you over to Emer again, and she's going to talk us through some of the user personas that we created as part of our family law work.
Thanks, Brian. So as I mentioned at the beginning, when we started this, we kind of, our brief was reform family law. So we had to understand who's involved in the family law process. So we developed multiple personas personas, so very, very high level groups of people that we needed to look at. So you can see here that we have a set of 9. There are the ones on the top are members of the public who are engaging in different ways for different purposes with different application types, different issues. And I'll bring you through a couple of those personas in more detail in the moment. And down the bottom, we have they're kind of nearly partners in delivery, because it's slightly different in the court service. We can't deliver courts without our judges and legal practitioners. they are part of the delivery system, but they're not responsible for the delivery of the system. So it's an interesting dynamic, to say the least. So obviously we need to understand their experiences also. And one thing that I'll note is that apparently Jakob is the image of one of our colleagues' brothers, and John, who our designer had never met. There's actually a court service staff member called John who looks like this, who's actually works at the public counter and is very involved in innovation. So that was he told us he's very proud to have his image used in these personas, because we did check with him before we used them when we saw them. So I'm going to bring you through 3 personas. So I'm going to introduce you to Jakob, to Mary, and to Alex. And what I want to just point out here is I loved how the designers, the service designers, came back with such a well-rounded personality, background, bio information for Jakob. So they looked at things like, up here in the top left-hand corner, you can see these are the types of cases, family law court cases or applications that Jakob might make. Down here, we know why Jakob is trying to engage with the court. We know that he's 45. We know he's recently arrived from Poland. We know he works in Kildare, or he lives in Kildare. He's a chef. And the reason that he's in Ireland is that his daughter, whose mum he is estranged from, is also living in Ireland. They're living in Wexford. But there are family issues. There's alcoholism in the family, which is a very real story that we come across in relation to child-related matters. So Jakob is estranged from mum, and he's very worried about his daughter because he's not sure that she's safe. He doesn't have formal guardianship rights, and that's something that he needs to look after. So we know that Jakob is worried. We know that English is not his first language. We know that he's not familiar with the Irish court system. We know that he is really, as I said, worried. So there's a time critical issue here. But also, the pain points that people identified through engagement, they are also built in through these personas. So we know that we don't have sufficient resources in place for Jakob to be able to engage with the court service. We know that he's going to have to ask somebody to come with him. So in this instance, Jakob is asking his boss to come with him to discuss really sensitive personal information about a very difficult family situation, just so that Jakob can navigate a system to keep his daughter safe, because that's ultimately what he's trying to do. One of the things that I found great about the work that the designers did was they looked at court data, they looked at court application types, they looked at social media, they looked at parenting stuff online. They looked at Twitter to see what people were saying about what it's like to come to court, about what this stuff feels like, about the types of issues that they're having. They looked at socioeconomic data. They looked at census information. You know, they looked at socioeconomic information. We also decided to create a non-binary profile, and part of that was to challenge ourselves because we weren't familiar writing with their pronouns. So that was something that we had to do, and I'll bring you through Alex's in a moment. But you can see how it's a much Jakob to me is a real person. Jakob is somebody who this is somebody who comes into court offices all the time. This is not a pretend story. This is very, very real. And we know that what Jakob, his future dreams is that he'll run his own restaurant, and that he will move to Wexford, and that he will be able to look after his daughter, and he will be able to build a good relationship with her. So he's a very rounded and very real human. He's not just post-its on a wall that goes, Jakob would like information online. Jakob would like to be able to not have to queue, and to be able to engage with us outside of traditional working hours. So he's a much more rounded person. And I still talk about Jakob and Mary and Alex and John by name when we are looking at different bits and pieces. So we'll go on maybe to Mary. And just to show you that this, again, it's another persona for a public user. So again, the same approach taken in relation to the data, feeding back the engagement, but creating a very real story for Mary that's very, I don't think anybody in the court service, or many of us in life would not recognize Mary's story. So Mary's 65. Her husband and herself are living separate and apart, but within the same home. Her husband is retired, they're dependent on his pension. Mary looked after the children all her life. And now their relationship has broken down and they want to apply for divorce. And Mary's very worried about the financial aspect of her future. But what I love about Mary is that Mary's actually open to dating again. and she's looking forward to her future, and she's thinking that she might go traveling with her friends because she never had that opportunity before. So while Mary has all of these worries about court and her future and how things might be, Mary is also looking forward, and that's why she's engaging with court. She wants to end this part of her life that needs to end, and she's looking forward to something into the future. So I love those little very personal details that make things just so very, very real. And it's really important that we understand the emotions and behavior. So Mary is anxious. She's not tech literate. She doesn't know where to start, but she also is optimistic. So, we need to make sure that when Mary is engaging with the court service, she can get the information that she needs in a way that she can understand it, in a way that she can access it. She can inform herself about her best choices. She might decide to represent herself. She might decide to get a solicitor. I think in this instance, she's decided that she is going to talk to a solicitor because she'd be more comfortable, which is brilliant. So that's Mary's situation, and we'll go on maybe to Alex. So this is, we tried to, as I said, write this as a not, now there's actually one typo in this, I noticed it last night, but anyway, this is a non-binary profile. So the reason we chose a domestic violence victim non-binary profile was because when we were starting to look at future buildings, the domestic violence services divide down male-female lines in terms of services. And actually legally, they have to support everybody, but we're not sure that's a message that's out there. So that's something that we will have to look at in the court service. So again, Alex is out of a very abusive relationship. There's a time pressure. They feel very unsettled. They don't have a settled address. They've just lost their job because we built in pandemic stuff in here as well. They're starting to show signs of depression. They're engaging with their doctor in relation to seeking assistance in relation to depression. They aren't entirely sure where they can get support in relation to domestic violence issues. So just like with Mary and Jacob, this is a very real person who comes to our counter. They may not be called Alex, but it's the same emotions, it's the same behaviors, it's the same concerns, it's being human. So these personas help us to step into the shoes of humans and not be the system. So that's just to give you an overview of what those personas look like and the type of information that's in them. So Brian, I think you're going to bring us through how we've applied those personas to the provision of information user journey.
Yes, absolutely. So I guess it's how we move then from from having the personas, what we actually do with them, and that's what brings us to user journeys. So user journeys basically they highlight how users might interact with a service. And when you're looking at user journeys, the main thing you're doing here is you're visualizing these particular user personas throughout I guess the lifeline of the journey, bringing it down into the series of steps or interactions they have over the course of time it might be. So like an example of a user journey, let's say very generic, might be somebody who wants to buy something online. So a user journey might be they're logging onto Amazon. There might be the first step. They're then choosing their product, putting it in the basket, paying for it, and then off they go. So that's kind of, let's say, a very high level of what a user journey would be. User journeys then can be used to visualize either the current status of a service or a future state service. So you might be looking to build out how a user interacts with a service as it currently is, or you might be trying to design what it might look like in the future. What's the best kind of scenario that this service could be delivered in to maximize, I guess, the user experience for your customers. And I guess also to point out that it's key that you're capturing the journey end to end. So from the very start to the very end, that you're not just starting in the middle because you're only concerned with that part. You need to think about it from a user perspective of where they're coming from the very outset. So we have two examples that we're going to walk you through here that we did as part of the family law work. They're two quite different examples in terms of the output we have for them and how we approach them, but they're two examples of how we would have used user personas to develop our user journeys. So the first one is going to be, this is a user journey in relation to divorce, and it's based around the persona that Emer just talked about there, being Mary. So as part of this work, this is looking at, so we have our current, I guess, process in place at the moment for divorce in the courts, and that is what this is it's a future state design. And so we basically wanted to come at this with kind of a blue sky thinking and think, right, imagine we didn't need the current process anymore and we could turn it into whatever we wanted it to be. So we took Mary and we reimagined what that process might be from beginning to end through the different stages of it. Now, in doing that, we did this by, we had workshops with I guess, with various different user type groups and different stakeholders involved in it. And in each of those workshops, we walked through what this kind of blue sky state could be through the eyes of Mary, and that's how we developed what this is that you're looking at here, which is the future state, I guess, journey map for what it would be. So when we were going through this, I guess it's very much based on what the questions that Mary might have at any one point in the journey, how she might be feeling, and then what the best case would be for the service at any particular point. So what we're looking at here is stage one in the process, and what this is up the top kind of line, you see the speech bubbles, and this is what Mary is kind of wondering at this part of the process. So she's basically wondering, she wants a divorce. So Mary wants to know, where do I start? What even are my options? She's even wondering, is she even eligible for divorce? She doesn't know what makes her eligible. Does she need a lawyer? So these are all of the concerns that Mary would have at this point in the journey. So we were then designing what this future service could look like. Some of the key aspects of it was, we want Mary to be able to log on to the courts.ie website and be able to access the information that she needs to understand what her options are. She needs to have a mechanism to be able to understand if she's eligible. So we talked about this kind of a decision tree functionality where maybe Mary would be able to go on, enter some information in relation to herself, and the system will be able to come back and tell her, from the information you've told us, Mary, yes, you're eligible, or perhaps no, you're not eligible. In relation to, does she need legal advice? This is another thing, so the information that's provided to her through the course.ie needs to be a breakdown in terms of what her options are in relation to in relation to getting professional legal services or not. At the end of then, Mary might still feel unsure about her situation. So what will be required is that we need to be able to provide her with some in-person support in the office. So what's required there is we need to have office staff. So this is the kind of front to back thing we talked about. So it's not just Mary, but we need to ensure that the court staff have the correct training. In terms of, they need to be trauma informed. They need to have, inclusivity training, non-bias training, this kind of stuff, and be well educated on the topic, so that if Mary needs to come in for additional support, that the court service staff are suitably, I guess, enabled to be able to provide that to her. So that might be the first stage of the journey. The second one then is that she decides at this point that yes, she does want a divorce. She understands that is the option that's most appropriate to her, and she wants to proceed. So some of her questions here might be, what do I actually need to do? How do I now go and apply? Do I need to go into the offices? Can I do it online? So again, it's very important here that, from Mary's perspective, she's somewhat tech literate. She would rather be able to engage with the courts online, wouldn't like to have to always keep going into the court office. So what's required here from a service perspective might be the ability for Mary to be able to log on through some sort of portal and be able to make her divorce application online using forms at any hour in the day that she may want to do it. Whereas the current service is that you need to be filling out a physical document and bringing it into the office itself. Again, throughout the process, Emer mentioned that, one of Mary's key concerns is that she wants to have financial independence coming out the back of it. So, that's a key question Mary would have in her mind here. So through this process and within the portal, what we might envisage is that Mary would be able to get information in relation to her, her financial desires, and the options available to her might be presented in the portal as she's going through with her application. Coming out then, she's made her application. So some of her questions or concerns might be, when is my court date happening again? She might have forgotten. How long will it take? What do I need to do to prepare in advance? So to, I guess, cover off Mary from that perspective, maybe some of the requirements in the journey would be that once she's made her application, the new court service system in the background could send her reminder notifications telling her when and where her court hearing is. It could also send her out an information pack that's going through, what she needs to know in advance, like what she might need to do in advance, what documentation she might need to bring, how long she could be expected to be waiting for. down to maybe what are the parking situation like for the court office that she's going to. So really tangible things that are important to Mary in advance of her court case. Additionally, as well, through the system, it came up that Mary should be able to provide any accessibility or other needs that she might have, so that the court office would know in advance if they need to do anything additional to help support Mary on the day of her hearing itself. And then it's on to the last stages of Mary's journey through the divorce process. So again, I guess the in-court might happen in court, but I guess the post-court is, after she's finished in court, her big questions will be, right, my hearing is over. How do I now access my divorce order coming out the back of it? Or is there anything else I need to do next? So the system here, how we envisaged it, should be that the system will be able to send Mary a notification to tell her when her new digital order is available to collect online, and that will reduce, the need for Mary to travel directly to a court office and make things a lot easier for her. And then I guess at the very end of it, you're kind of looking at how Mary is feeling here, and she's happy that it's done, and that's kind of the end of her journey. So you'll see there as we walk through it, we're basically tracking all of Mary's needs, desires, and questions, and I guess imagining a new service around what they are. If you were looking to design a full service, you would look at a number of different personas. So it might be Mary, it might be Jakob, and you bring them all in to get, an overall service that would help meet the needs of all your different user personas. So I'm just going to hand over to Emer, and she's going to walk through another example of a user journey.
So this is the last bit, you'll be glad to know. So one of the jobs we had to do was that money has been assigned to develop what's called Hammond Lane, which is going to be the first built for purpose family law complex in the state. So we needed to look at, in general, what future facilities do we want to have in place for family law users? So we looked at our various personas and we walked them through the building, and we divided the building into sections. So we have our public information zone, we have the support and settlement zone, where there might be co-located services where people have access to mediation rooms or meeting rooms to meet their solicitors. We have the court zone, and then we have the private staff zone behind the scenes and circulation routes and things like that. And the circulation routes are actually something that most public offices don't have. We have to ensure that there's prisoner secure circulation routes, secure judge circulation routes. So it actually gets quite complex behind the scenes, but thankfully we don't have to design it. We only have to just tell people how we think people might feel about it. So that's good. So I'm just going to show you how we approached figuring out what might be needed for public users in any new future family law buildings, based on our personas, based on our research, based on our engagement. So this is Jakob's journey through the building. It might be difficult to see, but Jakob actually makes 3 different journeys, and each time he engages in different parts of the building. So we know about the awareness piece, so he might have engaged online initially to get some information, or more likely his boss has helped him because his boss is the one speaking English. But hopefully in our future state, Jakob will be able to get the information. So he comes along to the court building. It's we need to look at how does he feel when he walks in through the door. What's the security like? How do we make the building feel calmer when people are in a very stressful situation? So they're the kind of things that we're pointing out to the architects for them to look at building into the design, to say this is how people feel when they come in. So Jakob gets met at the door by a greeter who asked how they can direct him today. So Jakob says, I don't know, I have questions. They went, well, pop over there to the waiting area and the information counter and a staff member will help you. So Jakob has actually brought his daughter and his boss with him. So they're both in the building with him. The staff member engages with Jakob. We need to make sure that there's privacy for people. These are very sensitive things that people are talking about. That doesn't exist for most people in existing court buildings at all. They weren't built at a time where anybody cared about privacy. It wasn't an issue. So the staff member suggests that actually it'd be better for Jakob to go into an interview room with the staff member to talk in more detail about the issue. So they go over to the waiting area until they're called, and then they go into the interview room. Now, at each of these stages along the way, there are room cards and definition and specification cards behind every single solitary part of the journey through the building. So in relation to, for example, the greeter at the door, it is, this person is going to need access to Wi-Fi. They're going to need to be able to plug in a laptop. There might need to be a public information display screen. So all of the requirements at each stage are all documented behind this. This is just the very, very high level user journey. So Jakob goes into the interview room. The court service staff member is able to speak with him. His boss acts as interpreter in this instance. And his daughter is also in the room, which is something we have to pay attention to because that's very real for a lot of people, that they either can't access childcare or they just feel safer, particularly if domestic violence is involved, when they have their children with them. So the staff member outlines the various options available to Jakob. So instead of just saying, yeah, here, fill that out, here's the date and we'll see you in court, the staff member can ask a few questions. They are trauma informed. They're more focused on outcomes rather than necessarily court processes. And they can give Jakob information about some options and supports that are available to him. So the mediation service of the Legal Aid Board is co-located on site, which is currently the case in some of our buildings. So Jakob says, do you know what, I'll go and have a chat with the mediator and see if mediation is going to be an option to resolve this so we don't have to go into court. So he moves from the interview room through the building. He meets with the Legal Aid Board, has a chat with them and says, do you know what, I think we might give this a bash. So trip 2, Jakob comes in again. The greeter is there, but Jakob may not need to engage with them because he knows where he's going this time. So he bypasses all of the public information areas. He doesn't need to go to the waiting area. He doesn't need to hang out anywhere. He's able to go straight to the mediation room where he's arranged to meet the mediator. He has his mediation session, but unfortunately it's not successful. So Jakob is now going to proceed with his court application. And what I should say back here in the interview room is that we're looking at ways in which Jakob doesn't go back to the end of the queue. So here Jakob might choose to issue court applications at the same time that he's engaging with mediation. So he can cancel the court date if he needs to, but if he needs the court date, then it's still there. He's not going back on the end of the queue. So journey number 3, Jakob might have a solicitor available to him. He may have met the means test requirements, or he may be able to afford to pay a solicitor for himself. So again, he comes into the building, he goes to the meeting area, which again should be a calm space where where the building is facilitating in lowering the stress for people, not adding to it. It should be a contributor to a better experience for people. He meets with his solicitor. He goes off to a private spot where he can have a quick chat with his solicitor in advance of court. He goes into court, the hearing happens, and then he can go back to a meeting area where he can talk to his solicitor in privacy about what happens, get the debrief, and then Jakob can leave. So that's really just showing you the type of way in which we've looked at how the different users will move through the building and what would need to be defined for them. And as I said, there's layers there's layers of detail behind each of these, but this is just to show you how you can use those personas in very, very different services, and how the outputs look very different. So I think that's pretty much everything to share with you. We're open for questions.